Correct. Welcome, everyone. My name is Matt, and I'm here, the host with the Y Club. And this is a new format that I'm trying out, talking in live about US politics. I'm not in the US, I'm not American, but I'm very curious about how things are folding out. And I do have a few thoughts on like how the US is building out an oligarchy, specifically with how Trump is handling things. So if you're just new and tuning in, then let me know. Otherwise, let's jump in. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to go through probably the weekly news that was around and see like what happened, what the outcomes could be for Trump, for the US, and potentially for the international community. So, right off the bat, the first thing that I think is pretty clear is how fast Trump is moving with Doge, with his entire department and executive branch, which could be looked at as a compliment, but it may not be the best thing to do in a democracy. The reason being is the checks and balances. Not sure if you guys saw the video with Musk when he's talking about bureaucracy being the fourth branch of like yeah, branch of the powers, and how it's unconstitutional, which I think very clearly showcases like how Musk thinks about the government and overall democracy, and how much he thinks that it is along the same lines as a business, which is a big error on his end. The reason democracy was developed in the first way, in the first place, the way it is to ensure that the people are represented in a way that places their best interest as a priority. And bureaucracy, if you guys are reading, for example, Tocqueville's Democracy in America, you can see he's talking a lot about how bureaucracy has been developed in order to provide accountability, provide transparency. And with Musk and with Trump moving so fast, they're somewhat breaking down this part of the government, which may not have been 100% efficient, right? This is something that they most of the time claim as waste or abuse. But if you're just looking at the budget office's estimation, it estimates that it's about $460 billion what is actually wasteful in the government spending, which is a lot of money in absolute numbers, but isn't as much in relative. It's like 3% of the total budget, which is about 6.8 trillion or so. So that is one of the problems. If Musk is looking at bureaucracy as sort of a barrier to growth, then he's going to potentially cut a lot of things that actually made a lot of sense for people who are not in the same social class as Elon. And there was I'm not sure if it was a real tweet or not, but Jason Calacanis from the All In podcast, I think tweeted, but I didn't find it, so he may have taken it down. But something like cut 10 to 35% of like government budget and see what's going to happen in order to get rid of waste, which is just not the best thing to do. The reason being, it's very funny. Like he is in a position where his money allows him to potentially avoid the negative consequences of government cuts. Right? He's not necessarily going to rely too much on Medicaid, Medicare, and really other governmental services. So if things get caught, worst case scenario, he has a worse day when he's trying to get things done. But for most Americans, or like the average American, I would say these things can impact their lives in like huge numbers and in big and impactful ways. So when Trump is, talking about the unconstitutionality of the judicial branch influencing like what is it doing and how is it doing things, then he and Musk are trying to break things down that were in the first place established to safeguard these institutions. So it's very funny. Like he is saying that it's unconstitutional, or denies that his actions are unconstitutional, which is rather funny, I would say, because it's not in the executive branch's sphere of power to decide what's unconstitutional and what's not. It's for the judicial branch to decide. And so, sort of, he's trying to find a way around it and justify his actions. But I don't think it's going to happen in any way because the lawsuits are already piling up. But the problem with that is, like I talked about this in the video that I have, is that if the legislative branch, Congress, is in an impasse, which means that they cannot move forward with meaningful policy decisions because there is an almost 50-50 split Congress in place, then that means that the executive branch has much more power to do things if the judicial power or the judicial branch is in check. So this is one of the likely cases where the executive power is going to just balloon, and we see already with Trump, firing inspector generals, going forward with the federal plan to get rid of people who don't want to work in the federal government, which is in huge numbers. So if that is the case, then that will mean that the government efficiency is actually going to get reduced and not increased just because you cut spending. So yeah, this is the first one to begin with. And yeah, this cannot be like the justification to sort of, not violate the law. Just say that, because I'm doing it for the better, or like at least he's claiming to do it for the better, that it does not violate any law. This is way beyond what the actual power is vested in the executive branch and the president of the United States. So this is a big, I would say, misstep, or like a step outside like what's possibility from the perspective of the president. This is just one of the things that happened. Let's see another one. Yeah, RFK was sworn in, which was a pretty interesting one, I would say. I'm not really for it. I'm not obviously a health policy expert, but I do have a degree in medicine, which could be a plus, could be a negative. But the way I see RFK is that he's rambling a lot about some of the health benefits that he sees in conspiracy theories, like being anti-vaccine, which I think have been debunked many times. It's very interesting when Bernie Sanders is sort of grilling him on his like past statements, and he sort of doesn't want to give a firm answer on that, which is, I'm not saying it's weird, but it does mean that that he likely knows the impact his decisions are going to make, which I'm not just saying they're not going to be popular, but they're not going to necessarily be very positive for the people living in the US. For example, taking out fluoride from the water system. It has been shown, or at least I'm not sure about the exact data set on that. It is rather inconclusive that in large amounts, fluoride could cause like neurological diseases and stuff like that. But the problem with that is the level of fluoride normally in the water is much, much below that. And it does help a ton with the dental hygiene of the entire country. And a country that doesn't have practically like a subsidized version of like dental hygiene provided for the vast majority of the population, and hence they need to go to Mexico or somewhere else to get that done, it's going to mean a lot of healthcare issues just stemming from that particular policy issue. So it's not going to be too popular. And I was going after SSRIs. Not entirely sure like how he's doing that. He says, yep, he's going after it. Assess the prevalence of and threat posed by the prescription of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers. Yeah, this can heavily backfire, to be fair. Yeah, as always, this is, or like not always, but this isn't backed by science what he's doing. And you don't really want to make decisions in a government position that are not backed by proper investigation analysis, like, cost benefit ratio, like, okay, what happens if we actually take away the medication of people? So it's coming with a lot of, I would say, typically like how the Trump government has been operating so far is that they mix very well truths with untruths, and like, I would say, yeah, health truths, which have like contain some part of truth itself, but not the full of it. And I think that RFK very often meddles with that, and he uses his platform to sort of push an agenda, which is in his interest. I do think that he believes in this stuff. I'm just saying that this stuff shouldn't be decided based on whether somebody believes in it or not. but rather scientific proof and analysis. And yeah, the proper checks and balances. So the executive branch, or just like, yeah, the chief officers of the executive branch shouldn't just decide these things just because they have personal beliefs. That's one of the reasons representative democracies work very well, is because even though I don't agree with everything the other person, believes in, they are still represented by some parts of the government, and hence that representation should be respected. If it isn't, then people will definitely revolt in their own ways, and it's going to just cause more unrest in the US and more division likely. So I don't think anybody wins big of like going after the SSRIs. I don't think that's the problem. And funnily enough, he even said that, yeah, he wants to take a look at the root causes of like a broad range of conditions, including autism, ADHD, asthma, obesity. I mean, most of it have a very like this isn't like the problem of not solving these issues in the US. I don't think has to do with like not understanding the root causes of it. So it could be potentially just like a conspiracy rabbit hole he's going down on. And instead of just taking a look at the data and the scientific proof and evidence, or potentially just sitting down together with the people who are actually working in healthcare or doing this research and just try to implement better policy decisions. So I don't know what this investigation should yield as a result, but yeah, it's just going to be like obesity. I don't see like how, for example, the kind of diet that most Americans have, or at least the way I see it in the US, how many people have type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and the likes, and how little people actually move, not just in the US, but like here in Europe as well. So the root cause is pretty clear, I would say. It's just really what you do with it and how you can implement policy changes that will make a difference without just rambling or without overspending on stuff that actually won't move the needle. So yeah, that's kind of crazy. What happened now? What else happened? Yeah, back to Musk, honestly. Um, when he said that, getting rid of bureaucracy could help the US, I I think there is merit to that thought. Or like you could take a look at it and say, yeah, we could actually have more efficiency in the system. I think the problem is that Musk is sort of overestimating his ability to overview such vast things as the US government and just claim that, well, I understand, I don't know, rocket science or parts of rocket science or how to run a business. Therefore, I must understand these things. For example, he has posted in the past about Hungarian politics, something with which I'm fairly familiar with, living here. And the kind of incentive or the kind of motivation that he had for posting that and the kind of material he posted shows that he knows very little about Hungarian politics. So my presumption is that he knows similarly very little about a lot of other things. AfD in Germany. He posted about the president in Austria denying the far right the majority position in the parliament, or like there was the meddling with that. He called it a clear sign how the leftists and the liberals in Europe are trying to break down democracy. So these things show that Musk doesn't have a full understanding of like how things truly work, but he loves to pose as the person who does know, or like I think that's his persona. I think the first signs of that was when there was a cave incident where the kids got stuck in the cave and Musk started getting into that. And there was I think a diver or somebody, and yeah, Musk just called him a pedo guy for talking his own, or like pointing out his own argument, which was the first weird occurrence, at least to me. Maybe there have been other of like, maybe something's not right with Musk. But now after like him talking about bureaucracy, it is clear that he doesn't understand it. He looks at the US as a business. He wants to maximize profit growth, whereas the existence of the United States is not with a purpose to maximize business efficiency, profits, or whatsoever, but rather to provide representation for the vast differences that are among people and to distribute power in a way that doesn't allow actually for an executive branch to take over the entire government, but rather dissipates that power equally between the three branches and including bureaucracy, which helps. So abolishing that will lead to actually, I think, a lot of abuses when it comes to the U.S. outcomes. There was the other news this week as well. Who got who got appointed as the OSHA? The guy from Amazon appointed. Uh, from Amazon. It was nominated. Okay. So President Donald Trump on Thursday nominated David Keeling, former safety executive from UPS and Amazon, to lead the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Um, yeah, this is the problem with it. Like probably Keeling and like most of the people appointed by Trump are following the president's agenda very closely. The problem with this is that loyalty becomes such a major part of making decisions on who gets to sit at a table that maybe, and there is, I think, a good argument to put forth, merit is going to be thrown out the window. So in a country where loyalty is more rewarded rather than competence, that's the first sign I would say of like the downturn of that country and how things can go wrong. The same happened in Hungary. I think the way it works, and this is a theory I'm working on, is that in the beginning of democracy, people sort of transmit the power. Like they understand that they cannot by themselves organize well enough their lives to protect them against outside enemies, to do trade properly, to facilitate the economy in a way that a government could. So people, the group of people who realize that, have the competence of like um, sort of serving themselves, being able to look after their lives and everything, but decide that they give up some of that power to organize a central government in order to organize security and military and to protect the people and keep their best interests at heart. What is happening is that once the government loses the competency and the people who initially gave over the power also lose the competency to take care of themselves, once the government realizes that, the government can start taking away rights from the people and can do a worse job, sort of like in an enshittification process, make the service of the country and the central government worse without the people having an ability to do anything about it. And with regards to Keeling or other people, they may have a certain level of competence, but loyalty is definitely a driving decision, or like, yeah, a driver in that decision to point them to various positions as heads of departments, which is a big problem. Because what happens if you need competence, and let's say Keeling at one point will say, well, Donald, we're not going to do that because it's going to hurt, I don't know, workers across the US. What happens if Trump still wants that agenda to go through and he sees this as sort of a disloyalty to the people? So how is Keeling going to fare against Trump or the entire executive branch if he doesn't have that kind of, or he has a conflict with other people in the executive branch? Whereas with competence, things should be evaluated at their merit instead of them being evaluated based on loyalty and who said that. So with Keeling, the problem is that, as here is cited numerous times, the company Amazon was cited numerous times for serious violations of Section 5A, one of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, for Amazon's failure to furnish a place of employment which is free from recognized hazards that were causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees. Now, this is a big problem. If there is a department head, or like an agency head who has a previous record like this, maybe we can suppose that they might not keep the best interest of the worker people or working people in the working class at heart. So this is a big problem. Yeah, 51 penalties. 5,000 USD. I mean, this is also peanuts for Amazon. So, I mean, I'm not saying, just you from Europe, that I know too much about the Safety and Health Act in the US. But if a company can violate um, the rights of people 51 times with having to pay less than $1 million for the total of it, well, it's not too firm of a reason for companies to start implementing better policies that actually protect people. So this was quite big, I would say. Hey Pat, good to see you in the chat. So as I pointed out in the oligarchy video, if you guys are interested, you can find it on the channel. It shows that the executive branch has and will have much more power through appointing loyal people as heads of agencies, heads and chief executives of the executive branch. And the problem with that is that now Trump is calling people against the judicial branch, sort of making the judicial branch look like the bad guys here, trying to stop, Trump, Doge, Musk, everyone, get rid of government waste because they claim it's part of a grand scheme of corruption on the left, which is, I think, ridiculous and is not substantiated by much evidence. For example, like when they were talking about how they spent like $50 million on condoms in the Gaza Strip. Uh, that was not substantiated. So the way this kind of reporting works is that Musk posts something which doesn't have like any factual basis, posts something on Twitter, and then Fox News goes out or parts of the media goes out, references Musk, and then other parts of the media start referencing Fox News, sort of to legitimize the source of the news. It is not a good circle. And with the heads being appointed, mostly being loyal, but do have competence, like Gail Slater, for example, to lead the antitrust division. I don't think that she doesn't have the right competency to potentially uh, come down with force on like the likes of Google, but without the ability to enforce the judicial branch's decisions, the executive branch together with the corporates can make things happen in a way that they wanted without much checks and balances in the system anymore. So that's very dangerous because it will mean that the agency heads running these things potentially will not look too much on the abuses against like workers, abuses like in the healthcare system, and so on. So it's going to be happen like a different kind of abuse is going to happen rather than financial efficiencies, I would say. Yeah, just to begin with, what else? Oh yeah, then the prices. I saw how much do like eggs cost? Like the eggs, it's interesting. Like I think here in Europe, one of the big things when you're comparing prices like across countries is like looking at the beer, like how much beer costs. You can sort of determine the economy of an entire country just like asking a person like how much does like I don't know a pint of beer cost. But in the U.S. is the eggs. What is the eggs price right now in the U.S.? Yeah, this is what I saw. Okay. Yeah, it's 4.95, right? It's for 1 dozen eggs, 4.95. Like the prices I think are going to increase only in the US, to be fair. Like there are a few things to that, or like a few different factors that play into that. One is going to be the tariffs, I think. That's definitely going to increase like consumer prices on the imported goods. Even if it's like mostly businesses who first will pay those, they will charge the end consumers in the end. There is just no way that doesn't happen. That's one thing. The second I think is likely to do with the budget and the deficit in the U.S. budget. Um, so right now, the U.S. debt to GDP, I think, is at like an all-time high. And Trump already advocated for having the debt ceiling either pushed back to, I don't know, 2.7 trillion for the next 3 years or so. Um, Either have that or have it like abolished completely. which I don't think the Democrats will go along with. The reason being, like, a lot of people are against the debt ceiling, but it does have a a big significance when it comes to like overall government spending and how that influences prices, interest rates, and the likes. If the debt ceiling will be sort of pushed back on, which is likely to happen with some compromise from the Republicans during the budget negotiations, if that happens, if it gets pushed out, then more debt is going to be incurred by the U.S. government. Then the US government is already paying a large sum in terms of interest that need to pay that are to be paid back to the creditors. And if that happens, there is a possibility that the interest rates will start going up, causing that the interest rate for others are going to go up as well. So overall, the credit scoring of the entire U.S. could come down to some degree, and could just mean that people like creditors in general are more, how to say that, more conscious about the risks of like potentially the US defaulting on its debt, which isn't likely to happen, to be fair, but it is a possibility that they want to avoid. Increasing the interest rates will slow the economy down, or like together with that cause some form of inflation, which will raise prices further. So that's just going to mean that in the US, I don't think, or I don't see how the prices should come down or closer to what they were before, simply because there is not much fiscal responsibility. To be fair, in either brand, like either parts of the aisle. So neither the Democrats, neither the Republicans practice that much of it. I think the Republicans typically practice less than the Democrats, just because smaller government, less taxation, and so on. So that means that somewhere the revenue is going to not come in, and you're going to just have to have more debt in order to uh, not cut spending on like crucial things in the government program. So that is going to be a big problem, I would say. What else is happening? Let's see why others think that the president is going to go into a dictatorship. I'm curious about this. It's a very interesting like talking point these days. Like, what is the U.S. exactly? Um, yeah, in its name is a democracy. I don't think it's a dictatorship. There is like a lot of power right now in the executive branch, and then not much to stop it. But with the term limit, it is still not going to be a dictatorship. And somebody pointed out under my video that yeah, the U.S. is an oligarchy, so what? So is Japan and Russia, and I don't know what the other country was, but I'm like, I don't think the U.S. wants to sort of be compared against Russia in the same form of government, like with regards to the form of government. I don't think that is a competition to get into. Like, well, yeah, but the same is going on in Russia. I mean, I think that's a slippery slope of not getting much value out of your government when Russia is sort of like the counter to it. Like, yeah, well, it's worse than Russia, right? I don't think that's a good one. Um, so what would be the way to know if it's a dictatorship? Yeah, yeah, the legal counteroffensive against Trump Musk deconstruction of the federal government has begun. Makes sense. That's one of the jobs of the judicial branch. Attorney generals, unions, and other groups have already obtained multiple restraining orders and injunctions commanding that illegally frozen funds flow and illegally suspended employees be reinstated. Um, yeah, that's very logical to do. Overall, I would say that's one of the things that you can do. Like, this is a form of civil resistance, and it's built into the Constitution of the U.S. So there's no way that Trump could get away with everything without having serious resistance. towards him, and the more he does, the more lawsuits are going to come through. Yeah, it's just a compliance, right? So the judicial branch's power is only as good as the enforcement to, or like the ability to enforce the court proceedings and all the judgments on that. Yeah, it's simply defying court orders. They can do that. This is interesting with regards to the funds. I think there was a case of, yeah, with USAID. A lot of people are first hearing about USAID. The USAID is not just a nice city that the US government does. It's a big governmental program to develop foreign interests through, yeah, sometimes charity, sometimes um, political ways of meddling with other countries' form of government, and sometimes I think the argument is solid that it could make sense that it is used for like economic benefits, coercion, and just making sure that things are running the way the U.S. wants them to be run. And I think they spend about 60 billion on that a year, or like half spent on that for that for the recent years, which is still about a 1% or less than a percent of the total budget. And then they cut that, and that also meant that a lot of the investments in like produce and other materials are going to rot away, which is a huge government waste actually, because you already made that investment. You should do something with that food or all that aid going through Asia, Africa, and the likes. And they denied this, which I don't see like how, like theoretically, if you stop the funding and you sort of uproot an entire initiative and a big part of a governmental policy program, then it should have ripple effects throughout the entire program. So throughout USAID, which could lead to the disruption of like aids, charities, logistics, payments, everything, which could lead to a lot of waste. And I don't see like how theoretically this shouldn't happen, but they denied the claims, which, yeah, this is a big problem with this. Like if you start cutting things, then somewhere like every action will have a reaction, and it's just going to bring things down, which is not necessarily a good thing. Yeah. This is a problem. For example, on claiming that battling government ways, government financial fraud, which is just, it could be financial inefficiency, but they should go through the judicial branch to break down on such things. Like the executive branch shouldn't just go around and stop entire funds, but should go with the court proceedings, help congressional committees to launch formal investigation into this waste, and everything, and make sure that that waste and fraud is being like there's somebody held responsible. Instead of that, they're just cutting it, and they're unlawfully withholding the funds from private and public groups, which is a lot of, I think, small businesses, school districts, a lot of different places where this money could have been spent, but they're being withheld. So really the question is, in terms of dictatorship, is like what happens if Trump ignores everything. Yeah, exactly what I talked about. Like the fundamental weakness, of course, is that their orders have forced only people, including government officials, obey them. In a society with a strong rule of law tradition, obedience rarely, if ever, requires compulsion, right? It should be the case. Um, yeah, the problem is going to be like, this is sort of like what Trump is doing, and like what the executive branch right now is doing is they're undermining the rule of law, which is a big component of democracy, and on which a lot of our institutions, not only just the executive or the legislative branch, but also majorly in the judicial branch rest. It means that how are you going to court against like Google, or let's say you're an individual consumer, or like an individual um person, and you want to go against a big corporate, let's say, or someone who you consider more powerful than you. This is what Trump is doing, sets a precedent for those things to sort of spiral out of control and mean for the little people that they're not going to be equally represented in front of the law. So if you're undermining this institution of democracy, a lot of people, it's going to cause a lot of inefficiencies in your judicial system, and it will erode a lot of trust people have in the judicial system. They will not trust it, or they will not go to court, and they will yield more power to corporates or people who are willing to abuse that if they have the money or power, because they will not see any consequences of those actions. So that's a big problem, I would say. Okay. Yep. Okay. Civil, criminal. That's clear. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, what happens if Trump could be impeached, but you need, I think, a super majority for that to happen in the Senate, which is not going to happen with the Republicans. So, what are your like legal ways of holding Trump accountable for what he does without that possibility? And we already had that, and it didn't work. So, yeah, the judges and the judicial branch is sort of powerless on this one. Yeah, could be fined. Okay, I don't think he's going to care too much. He's probably going to claim that it's personal or like a political attack, that it's like not substantiated anyway. Um, and also they could just, hold those trials until, I don't know, 10 years or 5 years. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that they're extended and nothing gets prosecuted on. This is one of the ways in which, for example, Jack Smith, the guy who prosecuted Trump, was already fired. It just shows that the executive branch appointing people who are more lenient towards the particular abuses that they commit against the people, if they're not going to be held responsible because, loyalty is more important than competence or making the right decisions or being ethical, that's going to mean that in case an appointed executive would become judgmental or like suddenly out of nowhere would take a look at like what they could do, Trump, they like the executive branch, they could still remove them, right? Which is a big problem. It means that you can, in theory, always just remove people from the system who are not happy, not satisfied with the things, the way things are being run. So without the right checks and balances, this is a reality, I think, in the U.S. I think currently the strongest thing that keeps the U.S. integral, or yeah, is the term limit for Trump. So probably this is going to continue for about, yeah, the next 4 years, and then we will see what is going to happen, like how prices, how the economy is going to do, what the outcomes of these decisions are going to be, in order to see like what comes after. A lot of people are talking about, Barron being built up as like a legacy pick for later, but also there's like you need to be 35 in order to run for presidential office. So that's not going to happen for a while. How long is the kid? He is Yeah, he's 18. Okay. Right. So we have 17 or so more years before another Trump could be. I mean, not necessarily. Other parts of the family could run for president as well. And this is an interesting, I think, theory, how after like the Iraqi war, that was a big big mistake from the Republicans. And like that sort of eroded a lot of trust in the Republican Party. That made it almost, I'm not saying impossible, but they realized at some point that personas can better represent the people than large parties. And so I think this is one of the failures of the left currently, that they don't really have a persona who could reliably run for office and have a public presence that is captivating, has the charisma. such as Trump. You can talk a lot of bad things about Trump, but it's undeniable that he's funny, he has charisma, he's speaking in very simple terms with the people. It's very understandable what he's saying. There was one, like, with regards to this, where like Bernie Sanders, word eloquency, I think, where like they were looking at the number of like how many different words a particular person running for office uses, like how wide their vocabulary is basically. And the less words you use, or like the less variety of words you use, the better your chances of potentially winning the elections. Simply because people need to be talked to on the level of a fifth grader or a fourth grader or something like that. And Bernie Sanders never really stood a chance with, I don't know, I think he speaks in like a on average on a 10th grader's vocabulary. How is that, like presidential candidates vocabulary? How's that? Not this. Hmm. Complexity of speech. Okay. This was, yeah, from 2016. Most presidential candidates speak at grade 6, 8 level. Yeah, you can see Trump is Trump is. I mean, actually, like, in comparison to like Bush, yeah, Bush didn't really speak well grammatically, I would say, but Trump, in terms of vocabulary, is definitely leading the pack. You see that Sanders speaks on a 10th grade level. Obama was quite eloquent with his vocabulary and had proper grammar. Lincoln. So I think there was one. Yeah, true. Like win, for example, as a word is more likely to appear in third grade text than regrettably. So back to the personas. I think one of the failure of the left right now in the US, or just the way I see it, is very similar to what we have in Europe, is that the left doesn't really have now an answer to the right wing populists, because I think one of the issues is that the right wing populists are campaigning with a lot of real things during election campaigns that impact people on a very fundamental, let's say, primal level, much lower in the Maslow pyramid, just like the essentials, really. Whereas I think that the left, the liberal left in Europe and in America, sort of started visualizing a utopian society where really the next level is really just about recycling, carbon emissions, tackling climate change, where I think people rightfully felt sidelined or like left behind, who actually didn't have them that on their plates, right? To like talk about carbon emissions. Like for a poor family, it's not really on their radar to be environmentally conscious before having something to eat. So it is the same kind of failure I think most Western politicians do when talking about like how India or Indonesia should cut back on their emissions. It's very easy to say to people to cut back on emissions when you are driving a Tesla, or live, I don't know, in a two-story house, and you have all the comfort that you can wish for with your money, to people who don't know where the next bill is going to come from. So I think one of the failures of the left is that they don't really speak, or like for a while they didn't speak to the real problems of the people, and sort of started just using the system also for like building their own wealth. I think after a while people do become elitist and sort of start just pushing their own interests because they get disconnected from what reality is. I mean, you can say a lot of things about, I think, Bernie Sanders, but like just his persona, public image, it like keep seeing images of him doing activism when he was 20 or so. He's still doing that. Whether you agree with his policy suggestions or not, he is probably authentic in that way. I don't say right off the bat that he doesn't have conflicts or controversies within his like own philosophical framework for looking at government. It's just that he seems to be consistent and coherent with like what he believes in throughout the years, despite you not necessarily agreeing with him. Whereas with Trump and the right wing populists, they are very much able to sort of push on the pulse and really figure out what moves people to the streets, what they're interested in, immigration. You could argue that there is a level-headed discussion to be had about immigration, and I think both left wing sort of like for a while, at least in Europe, didn't really want to talk about that, didn't want to tackle. If you look at like Angela Merkel's remarks and politics decisions of like inviting a lot of immigrants, asylum seekers to Germany, that backfired big because it sort of denied the underlying condition. Many Germans still felt like, hey, I'm not being taken care of. Why should I care for somebody who is coming into my country who is going to get support to build out a life here when I'm feeling left behind? Uh, so with the right wing populists, they often talk about solving these things, but then I think the problem that's going to happen is that they're not going to really solve this because just as with Donald Trump, I think they're more interested in economic plays and making their own money or just grabbing more power than rather solving them. Or they will just realize probably halfway that, wow, it's really tough to solve poverty or really tough to solve immigration, and we're probably not going to do that. So at that stage, you're just going to realize, well, maybe instead of doing that, I can just still like talk about how the other side wouldn't do anything or would do just half of what I did, and just sort of start relativizing success and performance in like a hypothetical alternative, like if they were to run the country, how the country would perform. So with regards to that, I don't think much is going to happen during Trump. I think there are a lot of things that are going to happen, sorry, but not necessarily from the things that he's talking about solving. I don't think a lot of things will be solved that way. So yeah, I think this is a big issue, and you can see like Trump is talking to the average people. Obviously, the academics can understand Trump, and the majority of the U.S. understands Trump's speeches and political rhetoric, whereas some Americans already, or like most Americans already don't understand what Sanders is talking about. So the next question for the next 4 years for the Democrats is who are they going to build up? Happy to take any of your guesses. Not entirely sure. I think there are a lot of people who are talking about AOC just being a contender for that. But how old is she? Is she already 35? Yeah, she's 35. Okay, sure. So she could, in theory, run for office, but like I don't know for what reason, but women don't seem to fare too well in the U.S. election so far. So we'll see how that's going to happen. But I think the Republicans also have a big trouble of like building someone up. Not entirely sure. I don't think like Trump already didn't endorse, if I'm not mistaken, JD Vance. Like, did he? JD Vance. Did Trump endorse JD Vance? I don't think he did. Yeah, yeah. This is a good question from the Independent. Yeah, family, Donald Trump Jr. Probably could build him up. I don't see like how with money, with having access to public opinion through Twitter, Facebook, Google even, you couldn't push forward an agenda where Donald Trump Jr. gets built up. Um, Vivek, I'm not sure like he could win, or at least just from his public persona. I think he really backtracked after like Trump being elected. It was like they started out with Musk running Doge together. Then it quickly turned into just Musk running Doge by himself. So doesn't seem like Vivek is right now in the race. So who else? Yeah, Trump doesn't necessarily see as his inevitable successor, JD Vance, which is a big sign, right? You can talk anything about like Biden, bad, good. but he did endorse Kamala. So in history, it's an interesting question. Did U.S. presidents always endorse their VPs? Good question. That's clear that the party does that. Yeah, a lot of thought and strategy goes into that. Okay, probably for next time I can read up on this. Mostly failing to be president. This is from Vox from 2015. Okay, so overall, five VPs were elected after the president. Nine ascended when the president died or resigned. 12 ran and lost, and 20 did not run. That's a lot of people who didn't even run. So it it is not necessarily a positive outlook for JD Vance. I mean, he could still run, but not necessarily win, or like most likely not going to win just based on this. Or anything could happen to Trump, and he could just get the position, but not necessarily he's going to be reelected afterwards. Yeah, it's interesting that in 2015, Joe Biden said he won't run for president. I mean, the way things change in the US, crazy. Okay, that's pretty solid. By the way, I see there are a few people watching. Not doing it for like big number of views, but in case you guys have any question, happy to take them. What else happened in the US that you guys think is important for the week? Trying to pick things from Reddit. What's funny, if you guys have the time, um, just go to Reddit, just look at the mainstream of the feedback, and then go to the conservative Reddit thread. It's very apparent, honestly, like how much emotion is involved in people looking at things just within the U.S. On U.S. politics. Um, it's a lot, to be fair, and it shows very well like how both sides of the political spectrum are wishing, I think, a lot of harm on the other. Like I see the conservatives welcoming a lot of, obviously welcoming a lot of Trump's policies, even though they hurt them. They sort of want the Democrats to be hurt a little bit more, and they'll say, "Well, I don't mind suffering if they suffer more." And then the Democrats are sort of also getting off on seeing the Republicans potentially suffer the consequences of Trump. It's sort of like, well, I told you so moment, which overall for the country is not really good. So it's sort of like claiming a moral high ground by being happy for the suffering of the other, regardless whether they're ignorant of that suffering happening. That is not necessarily good. So I don't think it's a good way to look at things, to just be vindicative, but rather like this is one of the problems with the US, the division. I'm not sure if you guys saw. I think even this is interesting. I agreed with the RFK division media. I think he talked about that. Just how to search for it. US divided. Okay. The what I wanted to talk about a little bit was the division in the US. In 2024, there is this thing called the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is an interesting like global report on like how divided people are on certain issues, and it is very interesting to see like how most people don't necessarily trust like not only politicians, corporates, but the media as well. And it is going to be a big problem. You see that it's rather conclusive. 28 countries, 32,000 respondents. So it's a comprehensive study. It's not just like asking 30 people what they think. Um, and this is interesting, like how overall like they have this timeline and they see, yeah, 2001 rising influence of the NGOs. I was a kid back then, so I didn't see too much of that, but I did understand like how that happened. And it's interesting like how from authorities we sort of started leaving that when the internet was really kicking in. And I think Facebook came around in 2005, and that meant that with the decentralization and the democratization of the internet, people started to look at like what peers are thinking and how 20 years from now, or like 20 years after this, how we're still looking at like what other people think. And this is actually being abused by the people in power. Like when you look at the Romanian guy launching his propaganda campaign on TikTok and how he influenced the algorithm to sort of push his agenda and make it appear in front of people, how that meant that people are not only shifted heavily from the authorities to the peers, but this is already being so much so that it's abused to the degree where like politicians are now trying to figure out like how can I appear in a way that people will think this is coming from a peer, but it's really not. Just like because I don't trust a politician, but if other people are trusting them, or like I perceive others to be trusting them, I may be more trusting as well. So this was in 2005, and since then, we came a long way. I think the social media engines and algorithms had a big say in how this happened. I think Zuckerberg right now is really flying under the radar, but I don't think we should make the mistake of thinking that he's like sort of this refined person after his abuses of information, data privacy, and so on. So I think the brand that they're creating right now for him is absolutely ridiculous. Like how does it look like now? Zuckerberg rebranding. Like yeah, rebranding this as like a dude bro figure right now, right? Like from going like I mean yeah, he looked like a tech guy. He had a lot of, I would say, evil things happening. And when he started, like, yeah, the July the 4th appearance, this was the first moment, I think, when people are like, this is a weird timeline. And now he fully transcended into like the bro with the chain, just Zuck. Um, and and this just shows that like he is now creating a separate public persona from Facebook. And I think it is in some ways to avoid being labeled or like yeah having this wearing the same label and the kind of baggage that comes with with Facebook's abuse of their power. Uh, there are a lot of them. Yeah, the mass class divide, 2016. Yeah, Trump. I mean, Trump is, I think, a consequence. Trump is not necessarily the cause of like all evil, or like I think he's just a manifestation of a lot of people's frustration. And I think one of the failures of the left is not being able to address that frustration, but rather attack Trump. This is one of the reasons I think, while you could argue that a lot of Trump's policies mimic that of fascism, is not a fascist. Like Trump is not the root cause of evil, but he really represents the anger, frustration, and the divide that is in America. The Battle for Truth, 2018. Not sure why. I think it's just their study. And it's interesting that in 2021, businesses were most trusted. We can take a look at like how that happened. Um, okay. I think I just want to see. Yeah, it's this is I think this is interesting. Like a lot of people and a lot of analysts, with now the elections, we're doing an analysis in many different ways, trying to like, predict who's going to win the U.S. elections. A lot of them actually brought out Kamala to win the race, and I think a lot of analysts and pollsters at times disregard like the economic background and just the entire setup that is present in the country. And you can see, and this I think this is rather without um, a political leaning, I would say. Most people like fear economic downturns. They fear job loss. They fear inflation, and they almost do more than climate change, right? Like with regards to inflation, which is, I think, just shows how powerful this is. I think if we were to look at like nuclear war right now, it's going to like this in 2025 probably is going to be among the top one. So yeah, there was one here which was, I think, really interesting. But overall, if you're interested in this, read the entire survey. Yeah, for example, it's interesting that most people, like the majority of people, believe that rather scientists and technical experts should lead an implementation of innovation rather than government leaders. Um, we will see, for example, with Trump that, as we talked about, that it's not going to be competency making the decisions in as much as being loyal. And if it is so, I think the service of the US government is going to drop heavily. And I don't think it's going to go for the better overall. It's interesting also. To earn my acceptance, show me the innovations vetted by scientists and ethicists. Average acceptance rating for each innovation. This is high, this is for low. Confidence that each innovation has been evaluated by scientists and ethicists. GMO food. People typically were more likely to reject this innovation than they're being okay with it. Um, yeah, interesting how GMO, like we've been manipulating food genetics for the last tens of thousands of years, I would say. And but suddenly now that we're doing it in a laboratory makes it more dangerous. I do think that there could be a way to make it more dangerous, but I would say 99% it isn't. And this is actually one of the reasons people are really divided on like issues like this. When things go well in in a scientific field or like in a business, you don't really hear it in the media. People will just start reporting like, well, not much of abuse happened today at, I don't know, corporate X, or we still see that, genetic engineering works, or that the pharmaceuticals that we created 99% of the time perform their job. But when you hear like when an abuse happens, you hear that a lot, right? So that can give the impression of like, wow, things are really wrong with the entire pharmaceutical industry. Whereas in reality, most of the time, things are working very well. Like science so far worked really, really well. And the problem is that we do have narratives, and the media is highly responsible for creating this division, is making it look disproportionately larger, the problems, than they are in comparison to like when they work. So most of the time when you're sitting at home and the house doesn't collapse, it has to do with engineering. It has to do with like previous science done in that. And the reason things which we actually take for granted work is because it has scientific foundation. But obviously, if a building in a I don't know, in New York were to collapse, a lot of people would hear about that. A lot of people will talk about, wow, how did the engineering made a mistake here? The errors were not uncovered. There was, I don't know, an investigation launched earlier, but it was dismissed, and how that's a problem and how big of a problem this is. And it creates this sense of in people that, wow, I really can't trust the things around me because if I'm looking at the news, everything is wrong. Um, Whereas it is not really wrong most of the time. We just don't realize that it works because we just don't have it on top of our mind. So that is a big problem. And I agree with the most people here that scientists do not know how to communicate with people like me. Not sure, obviously, but I would think that in this survey, the general populace was surveyed properly. And if almost half of people don't feel like they're being communicated to in a proper manner, then that's going to be a big problem, right? Because like how are you like if people have an expectation from scientists and technical experts to lead the implementation of innovation, let's say, then them not being able to communicate that change it's going to mean that people are going to reject those changes, and they will think that it's coming from evil. Like you can see with anti-vaccination, yeah, a lot of things that we already saw, like polio, could come back. Or in a way, I don't know if like did we have like a polio case in the U.S.? Oh, nice. Wow. 3 decades after its eradication, the first case of polio reappeared, which is just crazy. We have been through this. Like the reason we came, or like the reason we are, is because we already walked this way, and now we're going back in ways, and it has to do in part with scientists not being able to communicate with the general populace, which is just crazy. Yeah, a lot of people are doing their own research to do things. I would highly recommend to just buy books as well, and not necessarily just rely on online searches if you're reading about really anything. Because if we can go back, like here we are, just you're online searching. How does most of the internet you're browsing looks like? It's going to be created by other people. Why? Because as we saw in the beginning, your trust already shifted from authorities to peers. And this needs to be called out as a potential bias. Like you think that when you're looking at what other people think, that is going to give you a better idea of what reality is. Whereas it could be as well abused and distorted in ways that actually mislead you heavily, and just yeah, cause your demise overall. And you will think absolutely fine with thinking so, but it is not going to serve your interest. So what else? Yeah, on AI, I think people are going to embrace this more until it hits their own line of work. Mm, just a side note. What else? I'm not sure like where in this exact survey it was. This is a technical one. Ah, okay. Yeah, here it is. So the overall trust in businesses is about 63%, I think. Yeah, percent trust in business. It's about 63. In India, a lot of people trust businesses. In South Korea, not much, which is kind of interesting. And I think, yeah, I think something like 61 or so trusted the government, or oh, it was just 51%, which means like half of the people don't trust the government, which is crazy, and half of the people trust it, which is crazy. Well, we talked about a lot of things today. I think this was a pretty good first live. Hope you guys were happy with it. I will do probably more in the coming weeks, probably on Sundays around this time. Just check in. I'll do my best to do some more research and prepare better to have like ready to go news and just to analyze them. But for a first run, it was pretty good. I hope you liked it. If you can drop a subscribe to the channel, like the live, I would be really appreciative of that. Otherwise, if you guys are interested in U.S. politics, politics overall, philosophy, um, geopolitics, and current affairs, tune into the Y Club. And otherwise, hope to see you soon. Have a great day, y'all.